When we think of building a utopian society from scratch, I feel like we usually picture, concrete things like constitutional laws, agricultural zoning, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, the structural engineering of it all.
Exactly. You draft a Bill of Rights, you establish a currency, and a sociologist points at the grid and says, well, there it is. That's a
It
civilization.
is predictable.
Yeah, but what happens when a society is built entirely on like the suppression of human emotion and well, the weaponization of female gentleness?
Which is just a wild concept to even try and wrap your head around.
Yes, it really is. So today we are taking a deep dive into an ideological blueprint that just throws that whole traditional architectural model completely out the window. We're looking at a translated essay from November 1st, 2020.
Authored by Schwiffing.
Right. And it's titled All Chanyuan Women Are Virtuous.
Mm.
And I want to welcome you, listening right now, to what is honestly one of the most fascinating explorations of a unique ideological blueprint we've ever looked at.
It really is. And just to set the stage, this text is the philosophical bedrock for Lifechanyuan, which it's a highly specific intentional community that has cultivated its own distinct culture and lifestyle over the past decade or so.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is that we aren't looking at a traditional legal manifesto. We're looking at a document that constructs an entire sociological framework out of, basically, human personality traits.
Okay, let's unpack this because the ambition of this text is just staggering. Our mission today is to, well, decode the 8 core virtues demanded of the women in this community.
Right. And we're also going to examine the massive, completely uncompensated real-world labor they actually perform to maintain this utopia.
Exactly. And we'll explore a community structure that claims to completely, totally reverse traditional gender roles.
And just to be clear for you listening, our goal here is to take an impartial, analytical look at how this text operates. We're going to analyze the mechanics of this ideology, like how does this document construct its vision of an ideal society?
Yeah, we're just looking at the text itself.
Right. We want to see what the language reveals about the community's ultimate goals. We really need to look at the psychological levers the author is pulling here.
We absolutely do. And we have to start with the foundational philosophy, because before you can understand what these women have built, which, spoiler, is an empire of physical and digital assets, you have to understand the psychological mold they're allegedly poured into.
The ideal Chanyuan woman.
Right. The essay outlines 8 specific virtues. They are gentle, hardworking, elegant, kind.
Which is already a demanding list for anyone.
Seriously, but it goes on. They also have to be knowledgeable and reasonable, fascinating and charming, never jealous, and finally, well-educated, cultured, and self-restrained.
When you look at that list altogether, it is a highly engineered combination of traits. I mean, it merges the aesthetic expectations of, like, a bygone era with really high-level intellectual and emotional demands.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But the text frames this not as some historical fantasy, but as a modern, realized state of being for these women.
And the language they use to describe it is incredibly poetic, almost overwhelmingly so,
Oh, absolutely. Very flowery.
Yeah, the author compares their softness to flower petals and stamens. He writes that they are as gentle as breezes and drizzles, delicate as mountain flowers. And their romantic nature is likened to running clouds and fluffy catkins.
Fluffy catkins, yeah, it's very vivid imagery.
Right. But here's what I'm snagging on. When you read descriptions like delicate and soft, I mean, the immediate instinct is to view these women as passive.
Right, that's the traditional association with those words.
But if you read between the lines, this softness isn't passive at all. Like, think of it less like a delicate flower and more like think of water.
Right. Water. Okay, how so?
Well, water seems so gentle and yielding, but it possesses this immense power to carve actual canyons over time. Does the text portray this kindness as a passive trait, or is it described as like an active, world-shaping force?
It is entirely the latter.
Yeah.
And that is such a crucial distinction to make. The text frames this softness as a profoundly active power.
So it actually does stuff.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, their gentleness is the literal mechanism of transformation for the entire community. The author doesn't just praise their softness for being pretty. He credits it with terraforming their reality.
Terraforming? Wait, really?
Yeah, for instance, the essay claims that when these women organize dilapidated spaces, those places become clean, tidy, and what it calls distinct in levels.
Wow.
It even claims that through their mere presence, the harsh Gobi Desert becomes a place where birds sing and flowers emanate wonderful fragrances.
So they're literally claiming that their vibe changes the physical ecosystem?
Essentially, yes.
Mhm.
It's that powerful in the lore. But it goes beyond just the physical environment into deep sociological control, too.
How does that work?
Well, their kindness is explicitly credited with pacifying obedient children, and this is key. It strips men of their hostility and temper.
Oh, interesting. So it absorbs it, like
Yeah.
acoustic foam.
Your water analogy, or acoustic foam, it's spot on. Their softness is a tool. It absorbs and neutralizes the chaotic elements of human nature to construct what the author calls the most harmonious places in the world.
Wow. It's one thing to weaponize that softness against, the abstract concept of male hostility, but it is entirely another to maintain that delicate, fluffy catkin energy when you are engaging in backbreaking manual labor.
Which they do, a lot of it.
Exactly. And that brings us to the actual concrete reality of what this softness has built over a 10-year span. Because we aren't just talking about some theoretical philosophy here. These women have been incredibly busy.
The scale of their output is genuinely staggering, especially when you consider that it combines intense physical labor with really high-volume intellectual production.
Which you don't normally see together, right?
No, rarely. You rarely see those two extremes demanded simultaneously in ideological groups. Usually a group leans toward, like, ascetic farming out in the woods, or they just do intellectual theorizing in a compound. Lifechanyuan demands both.
Well, let's look at the physical labor first, because it's wild. Over a single decade, these women built 13 picturesque homes. And, we are not talking about throwing up drywall in a mild suburban climate.
Not at all.
They built these branches across absolute extremes. They are building high up in the plateau of the Yunnan Mountains. They are out in the sand-filled Gobi Desert in Xinjiang.
Which is incredibly harsh terrain.
Right. They are building in the sweltering heat of Nanjing, and they've even expanded internationally, building in Canada and Thailand. Plus, the text notes they planted nearly 10,000 trees.
Which, just think about it, requires an immense amount of caloric energy, logistical planning, and just sheer physical endurance.
No, absolutely. But then you look at the digital and intellectual labor, which operates on an entirely different cognitive frequency.
Right. It's a completely different skill set.
Yeah, they operate 8 different websites in both Chinese and English. They have translated thousands of articles, which, by the way, the text posts have been disseminated millions of times.
Millions of times, yeah.
They compiled nearly 300 long-form articles, produced around 100 videos, and they managed 3 separate subscription platforms.
It's massive.
I mean, this isn't just a community garden. This is a full-scale multinational media and real estate operation. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The text explicitly states the absolute catch to all of this. It says, quote, "No one paid them any salaries or bonuses. 0 financial compensation for a decade of grueling work."
Right. And according to the author, they did all of this while being knocked down countless times, yet they allegedly just, smiled indifferently and dedicated themselves without a single regret.
I have to stop here because the paradox is just glaring. On one hand, you have this intense, unrelenting grind. You have women sweating in the Gobi Desert, dealing with extreme altitude, hauling building materials.
Just brutal conditions.
Right. And then supposedly they go inside to translate thousands of philosophical documents for 8 different websites. But on the other hand, the text insists that through all of this, these women remain otherworldly, undiminished in appearance, elegant and chic.
It's quite the contrast.
I mean, I'm sorry, but if you are planting 10,000 trees in the desert sand, you are getting dirt under your fingernails. You are going to be exhausted. How does this ideology reconcile the reality of this grueling, unpaid construction work with maintaining this perfect, delicate elegance?
That's a great point. And this really raises an important question about how the community redefines the very concept of labor.
Okay, how do they redefine it?
Well, in a secular capitalist framework, we view labor as a transaction, right? Time and physical degradation exchanged for money. But this text strips that framework entirely.
So they don't see it as work.
Not in the secular sense. Within this ideology, labor is not mundane drudgery. It is framed as the ultimate spiritual expression of their virtue. They aren't working for a wage. They are manifesting their inner perfection outward onto the physical world.
So the sweat and the exhaustion don't tarnish them because the act of working isn't a chore. It's like a religious practice.
Precisely. The text states that these women are completely indifferent to money, power, fame, and wealth.
Okay, so that explains the no salary thing.
Right, because they have detached from those secular markers, the lack of a salary isn't seen as a form of exploitation in their eyes. It's actually a profound point of pride.
Oh, wow.
The fact that they can build a home in the desert without a paycheck and theoretically remain chic is offered as the ultimate proof of their transcendent nature. The labor is the crucible that proves their character.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, if they demanded a salary, they would instantly become secular and lose their otherworldly status.
So the lack of capital is what makes them divine. That is a powerful psychological hook. But, human nature dictates that eventually someone is going to snap.
It's practically inevitable.
Right. It's one thing to cheerfully plant a tree for free on day one. It is entirely another to maintain that smile when you're elbow to elbow with the exact same people for 10 years of unpaid labor in the desert.
Oh, for sure. Resources are stretched, you're physically exhausted, you're managing multiple websites.
Eventually, somebody is going to argue over how the translation should be formatted or who left the tools out in the rain, right?
In any standard sociological model, absolutely. Interpersonal conflict is a mathematical certainty when a group is subjected to that level of sustained pressure.
Yet the text directly challenges that assumption. The author actually references an old secular saying, which is, quote, "Jealousy is a woman's nature." And he aggressively shuts that down. He says you cannot fit that secular hat on the head of a genuine woman.
Not at all.
According to the essay, over 10 years of living and working together in these extreme conditions, there has been perfect harmony, like zero jealousy, no fighting. They actively compliment each other's beauty, they praise each other's merits, they congratulate each other's favor.
It sounds incredibly utopian.
Yeah, they just honor each other's grace continuously.
And the text attributes this total lack of social friction to a decade of rigorous, what they call cultivation. The ideology doesn't just demand perfection, it provides a three-pillar system to engineer it.
Okay, let's look at those pillars because they are essentially the emotional brakes of this society. So it's upbringing, self-cultivation, and self-restraint.
Right. So upbringing is defined as the baseline of civilized politeness they've learned from family and society. It's the foundation.
Just basic manners, basically.
Exactly. Then self-cultivation is higher level. It's their theoretical knowledge and artistic thought, which basically dictates how they view and treat others.
Okay, I follow that.
But the critical mechanism is the third pillar, self-restraint. This is the moral capacity to strictly control their own emotions.
So they have the manners to be polite, the intellect to understand the ideology, and the ironclad emotional restraint to just suppress any negative feeling before it breaches the surface.
That's the claim, yes.
The text claims getting along with them is like a spring breeze. They never make anyone feel uncomfortable, embarrassed, depressed, competitive, or cynical.
It's all order.
Now, I am struggling with this logic. I mean, this complete eradication of conflict sounds mathematically impossible.
It defies everything we know about psychology.
Are we reading a literal history of how this community operates day to day? Or are we reading a highly curated aspirational manifesto? Because never having a single argument in 10 years while building an international utopia for free, that stretches the absolute limits of human psychology.
It really is essential to question the reality of that claim.
Yeah.
And if we contextualize this within utopian literature, texts like this almost always function as both history and aspiration.
Blurring the lines a bit.
Exactly. The author is likely taking moments of genuine cooperation and projecting them as an unbroken 10-year absolute reality, to set the standard. But what's fascinating here is how the text uses the outside world to validate this internal harmony.
You mean how they interact with non-members, people outside the community?
Exactly. The text points out that these women face insults from what it calls laymen and accusations from mortals.
Mortals. Wow.
Those specific terms create a very sharp in-group, out-group dynamic. But it claims the women treat these external attacks with mere smiles.
No.
They don't react.
They just brush it off.
Right. The author uses this alleged emotional mastery, their ability to brush off the mortals, without internalizing the negativity or turning on each other as definitive proof that their cultivation system works perfectly.
That makes sense. The existence of the angry mortal outgroup justifies the necessity of the harmonious in-group. It's a closed psychological loop.
Very much so.
Okay, so we have these women who have achieved this unbelievable level of perfection. They're emotionally restrained, fiercely hardworking, intellectually sharp. Where do the men fit into this societal structure?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because typically, right, in strict ideologically ascetic communities, we see very traditional patriarchal hierarchies, like men at the top dictating the theology while the women perform the labor.
Yes. Historically, intentional communities overwhelmingly default to male-dominated structures. But Lifechanyuan's text claims to execute a complete and total inversion of that dynamic.
It is the exact opposite. The text explicitly states a core Chanyuan value, quote, "The positions of men and women are reversed, and women should be respected primarily."
A total flip.
Yeah, it describes the men literally throwing themselves at the women's feet. The men are branded as guardians, acting as, quote, "green leaves to serve flowers."
Which is very poetic again.
Very. And there is this striking, highly specific detail. The author claims these men would rather wash the women's feet than support and serve any great leader.
It is a profound ideological rejection of traditional patriarchal authority, replacing it with an almost religious matriarchal devotion.
And it is heavily, intensely romanticized. There is a quote right in the middle of the spiritual, structural text that reads, quote, "One night of romance with a gorgeous girl, a happy death thus deserved."
Yeah, that stands out.
That is jarring. It's basically saying, I would gladly die for one night with you. Think about how this operates. It's not smashing the patriarchy with a hammer, you know. It's dissolving it in a vat of romantic devotion.
That's a great way to put it.
Traditional toxic masculinity isn't banned by law. It's neutralized by having the men completely surrender their ego for a taste of this elevated divine femininity. So what does it mean that an ascetic community leans so heavily into chivalric romance to maintain order?
Well, if we connect this to the overarching design of the society, the romance is the ultimate vehicle for the ideology.
How so?
By positioning the men as willing, eager servants to the women's elevated moral status, the text redefines power dynamics entirely. It doesn't just put women in charge. It frames male submission as the only valid path to communal harmony.
So being the servant is the goal.
Yes, the men's desire to serve to be the green leaves is what validates the women's softness and virtue in the first place.
So the men are basically policing themselves. Their devotion ensures they never act out with the hostility and temper the text mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The psychological brilliance of this blueprint, whether you agree with it or not, is that it removes the need for structural enforcement. You don't need a police force to stop male aggression if the men are culturally conditioned to believe that serving women and washing their feet is their highest spiritual calling.
Wow. Okay, so we have the 8 poetic virtues acting as ideological acoustic foam. We have a decade of staggering, unpaid physical and digital labor that acts as a spiritual crucible.
Right.
We have the total eradication of jealousy through intense emotional restraint. And we have this complete reversal of gender dynamics where men are devoted, romantic servants. We have to ask, what is all this effort actually for?
What's the end game?
Exactly. Where is this community trying to go?
Well, every utopian blueprint has an end goal, right? A promised land that justifies the immense sacrifice of its members. And the text is very clear about what that destination is for the Chanyuan women.
The essay claims that because of their excellent character, their hard work, and their graceful temperaments, they are allowed to forever escape the harsh realities of the secular world.
And it gets very specific about what they are escaping to.
It does. It lists domestic violence, social harassment, the endless grind of secular housework, and just mundane social contacts. All of this intense labor, the emotional suppression, the reversed gender roles, it is all the required entry fee for their final destination.
The promised land.
Right. The text states they are currently walking toward the Elysium Celestial Islands continent.
Which is the ultimate promise of these ideological communities. If you perfect the self through absolute discipline, and you perfect the community through total harmony, you basically earn the right to transcend the physical and social limitations of the mortal world entirely.
You transcend the concrete, the supply chains, and the sociologist grids we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly.
You know, you listening right now, it brings us right back to our original question. We assume societies must be built on laws and infrastructure. But this text argues that true utopia is built entirely on the ruthless cultivation of the soul, on absolute emotional restraint, and on an ideology of perfect harmony.
And it forces us to look at the mechanisms they use to achieve that harmony, mechanisms that demand the total surrender of the individual ego.
Absolutely. So what does this all mean? We've explored how this community uses unpaid labor and gender reversal to escape the secular world. But it leaves you wondering about the extreme fragility of this kind of utopia.
It's a delicate balance.
It is. If this entire society, this whole Elysium, is perfectly balanced on the premise of absolute emotional suppression and the total absence of personal ambition, What happens to the whole ecosystem when just one virtuous woman wakes up in the Gobi Desert and decides she finally wants a paycheck?
It's a fascinating hypothetical.
Does the entire celestial island continent simply collapse under the weight of one normal human desire? It's definitely something to mull over as you navigate your own secular world today. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We loved unpacking this with you, and we'll catch you next time.